By the last cold week of October, when the cornfields around Mason County had been shaved down to yellow stubble, and the pumpkin patches were nothing but broken vines and frost-burned leaves, Clara Whitcomb started hauling in what everyone else was throwing away. The first load came before sunrise, in the bed of her father's old pickup, a truck so tired the driver's door had to be lifted before it would shut. The pumpkins in the back were split, bruised, caved in at the stems, or softened by the first hard freeze. Orange pulp leaked between the boards. Seeds clung to the tailgate. The whole truck smelled sweet, sour, and faintly rotten, like fall turning into waste. Clara backed it toward the old hog lot behind the barn, where a temporary fence zigzagged across a field that had once grown corn. She wore a denim coat too large for her shoulders and rubber boots black with mud. One by one, she rolled the pumpkins down into the straw, letting them crack open beside the wire. By mid-morning, the second load arrived. By afternoon, the third. Across the road, a pickup slowed. Then another. By evening, enough people had seen the piles of spoiled pumpkins and the thin, restless hogs behind Clara's fence for the story to move faster than the dust on the county road. Clara Whitcomb had bought 300 unwanted pigs. Clara Whitcomb was feeding them rotten pumpkins. Clara Whitcomb had finally lost her sense. The pigs had come from a livestock auction 2 counties over, the kind of sale where tired animals, odd lots, and bad decisions all passed under the same roof. Clara had driven there before dawn with a thermos of burnt coffee, a paper envelope of cash, and a number written on the back of a feed receipt. She had walked the pen slowly while other buyers leaned over rails, looking for uniform weight, clean lines, and quick turnover. Clara looked for something different. She watched which pigs still pushed toward feed. She watched which ones stood square on their legs. She watched eyes, breathing, skin, movement, and fear. Some were too weak. Some were wrong, in ways she could not afford. But scattered among the poor lots were animals that had not failed yet. They were simply unwanted by men who needed fast profit and perfect numbers. Clara had not bought prime hogs. She had bought runty shoats, narrow-backed barrows, and underfed gilts sold cheap because they needed time, feed, and patience. She had paid with the last flexible money the farm had, money scraped together from selling an unused gravity wagon, pawning her mother's old silver flatware, canceling the insurance on a broken combine that no longer moved, and cashing the small emergency savings her father had kept in a coffee can behind the furnace. It was not enough to save the farm in any ordinary way. It was barely enough to gamble. The banknote was already pressing against the house like bad weather. 84 acres, 3 generations, 1 failed harvest, and a folder of unpaid bills sat between Clara and foreclosure. The farm could not afford another full season of corn. It could not afford fertilizer at the rate the soil tests demanded. It could not afford seed, fuel, repairs, and hope all at once. So Clara chose the only plan cheap enough to begin, and strange enough to maybe work. She opened the gate. The first wave of pigs rushed the pumpkins, squealing and shoving, their snouts breaking through the soft shells. Seeds scattered into the straw. Hooves chopped mud into the orange pulp. The smell rose thick and warm in the cold air. Clara stood beside the fence with one hand on the latch, watching every animal as if the whole future of the farm had been written on their ribs. In a way, it had. The Whitcomb farm had not always looked so worn down. Clara remembered when the barn roof sat straight, when the machine shed doors rolled clean on their tracks, when corn stood high enough in July to swallow the lower field. Her grandfather had built the hog lot with locust posts and stubborn hands. Her father had planted corn with rows so straight that people used to point them out from the road. Then the losses began to come in small, ordinary pieces. A dry summer, a storm that flattened the south field, a combine repair paid with borrowed money, medical bills after her father's stroke, another fertilizer bill, another loan extension, another promise that next year would make up for this one. Next year never came clean. Clara had come home from community college at 23 and never gone back. She had been studying soil science at night, not because she wanted a degree to hang on a wall, but because she had started to suspect that something beneath the farm was being asked to give more than it had left. Her father had always taught her to look down before looking up, to read the ground before blaming the sky. After the stroke, he could still walk slowly through the yard, still notice the color of a corn leaf from a window, still tell weather by the ache in his hand. What he could no longer do was carry the farm on his body. That changed him, but it did not empty him. Most evenings, while other people imagined him sitting helplessly in the house, he sat at the kitchen table with Clara and a pencil, marking old field maps with one strong hand. He no longer had the strength to wrestle machinery through 12-hour days, but his memory stayed sharp. He remembered where the lower field used to stay green in August. He remembered where the old spring once seeped under the willows. He remembered that the hog lot, abandoned for nearly 20 years, always grew darker grass than the rest of the farm. It was his memory that sent Clara into the cedar chest in the upstairs room. The notebook was wrapped in a flour sack beneath winter quilts and a cigar box of photographs. Clara had seen it as a child, but never understood why her mother kept it there instead of in the office with the seed receipts and tax papers. The cover was cracked black leather. The pages were stained at the edges. Inside were weather notes, farrowing dates, feed mixtures, frost warnings, sketches of field rotations, and crooked lines of handwriting that belonged to her grandfather. At first, Clara read it like a manual. Then she found the page that made her stop. Pressed between two sheets was a small newspaper clipping from the year her grandfather nearly lost the farm in a flood. The clipping was brittle and yellow, its headline half rubbed away where a thumb had passed over it too many times. In the faded photograph beneath the print, Clara could make out a younger version of the barn standing in water nearly to the doors, fence posts leaning downstream, loose pumpkins floating in the flood like lanterns that had gone dark. Beneath the clipping, in her grandfather's handwriting, was a note about turning hogs through ruined fields after the water fell, feeding them damaged pumpkins and downed corn, letting them break waste into soil before winter rye went in. At the bottom of the page, written years later in her father's hand, was a sentence Clara had never heard him say aloud. Soil remembers who starved it, and it remembers who fed it back. Clara sat on the attic floor with dust floating in the light from the small window and felt, for the first time in months, that the farm was not only a debt, it was a conversation that had started before her and had not yet ended. The page did not promise rescue. It did not pretend that old methods could erase modern bills, but it gave her something better than comfort. It gave her a line of thought that ran backward through her blood and forward into the field behind the barn. That was why the pigs mattered. Not because they were easy, not because they were clean, not because rotten pumpkins could magically erase a banknote. They mattered because Clara had no money to buy fertility in bags, but the county was full of wasted food after harvest. Pumpkin farms needed spoiled fruit hauled away. Grocery stores tossed dented squash, bruised apples, wilted greens, and cracked melons. A small cannery east of town paid disposal fees for vegetable scraps. Orchard owners hated windfalls rotting under trees. To everyone else, it was garbage. To Clara, it was feed, manure, disturbance, cover, and time. She built the first rotation with salvaged fence panels and borrowed electric netting. She divided the old corn ground into narrow paddocks. She spread straw where the soil was bare. She mixed pumpkin with cracked corn, mineral, and other clean scraps the pigs could safely eat. She moved the animals before they destroyed the ground. Behind them, she scattered rye, clover, and turnip seed, then covered the soil with old hay. From the road, the whole thing looked like a mess. For the first few weeks, the town treated it like one. The laughter began in passing, then settled into the usual places where rural judgment gathered, near the coffee pot at the diner, beside the counter at the feed store, at the gas pumps, and along the fence lines after church. People did not need to repeat themselves long for Clara to understand the shape of it. They believed her father would have known better. They believed a young woman with a notebook and a herd of bargain pigs was trying to outsmart math. They believed the Whitcomb farm would be sold by spring. Clara heard enough. Then she stopped listening. There was too much work to do. Every morning before daylight, she crossed the yard with a headlamp glowing over her cap. Frost silvered the fence wire. The pigs rose from straw beds in clouds of steam, grunting at the sound of buckets. Clara split pumpkins with a short-handled axe, checked water lines, dragged hay, patched bent panels, and marked slow-gaining animals with livestock chalk. She recorded everything: feed costs, weights, rainfall, frost, waste, manure patterns, soil smell, puddling, hoof impact, the first appearance of worms. The plan did not reward her quickly. The truck sank axle-deep near the lower gate after a November rain. A cold snap froze the trough valves before dawn. One gilt went off feed and had to be nursed through the night. 30 pigs broke through a weak corner of fence and scattered across a neighbor's stubble field, forcing Clara and her father to turn them back by flashlight and feed bucket, one slow step at a time. Her father could not run. He could not lift panels. But he stood by the open gate in the cold, steady as a post, tapping the bucket with a rhythm the pigs followed. Later, back in the kitchen, he was too tired to eat much. Clara saw what the farm cost him now and understood that saving it would not mean restoring the past exactly as it had been. Some things could be honored only by changing them. By December, the yard smelled of straw, hogs, cold mud, and fermenting pumpkin. The old cornfield looked torn and patched, an ugly quilt of paddocks, trampled vines, seeded strips, and resting ground. The bank statement still came. The veterinary bill still came. The fuel bill still came. Clara still had nights when she sat at the table and let the numbers blur until the whole room seemed to tilt. One of those nights, freezing rain struck the windows so hard it sounded like gravel thrown by an angry hand. Clara sat alone under the yellow kitchen light with her notebook open and her coat still on, too tired to take it off. Her fingers smelled of iodine, feed dust, and pumpkin rind. Across the page, her numbers ran in narrow columns: what she had spent, what she had left, what the pigs had gained, what the bank would demand. For a while, the figures looked less like a plan than a confession. She had risked the emergency money. She had sold things that belonged to the farm's past. She had dragged her father into one more fight when he deserved rest. Outside, the wind pressed rain under the back door, and somewhere in the dark, a loose sheet of tin slapped against the shed roof, again and again. Before dawn, the rain stopped. Clara went out with a flashlight and found the paddock low and shining, but not washed bare. Straw had caught against the slight contour she had left. The rye seed had not all floated away. The pigs were crowded beneath the windbreak, irritated and muddy but alive. She stood there in the cold, water seeping through a split in one boot, and felt no triumph, only the smallest possible permission to continue. A week later, after hard frost, she knelt in a paddock the pigs had left behind and brushed aside the straw. Rye had come up, only a green haze at first, thin as breath on glass. But when she pressed her fingers into the soil, it did not crumble into pale dust the way it had the year before. It held together, damp and dark around fine roots. Under one clump of straw, she found 3 earthworms curled in the cold. She wrote it down. All winter, the notebook became more than a record. It became the place where Clara answered fear with evidence. On one page were bills. On another were gains. On one page was the bank deadline. On another was the first paddock, where water soaked in instead of running off. On one page was the cost of failure. On another was proof, small but living, that the farm was changing. By late winter, the pigs had changed too. Their ribs disappeared under firm flesh. Their coats grew cleaner and brighter. They moved through the paddocks with heavy confidence, rooting through straw, cracking frozen squash, and sleeping in groups beneath windbreaks Clara had built from old gates and tarps. Then, spring came dry. Fertilizer prices climbed just as farmers were preparing to plant. Diesel cost more. Seed cost more. Repairs cost more. Around Mason County, men who had farmed corn for 40 years stared at input sheets with tight faces and planted anyway, because debt had a way of making tradition feel like the only road left. Clara planted differently. She did not put all 84 acres back into corn. She could not afford to, and the notebook had convinced her she should not. She planted sweet corn and squash only where the pigs had already worked the soil. She kept other sections in cover crop and forage. She set aside ground for another rotation of hogs. She let the weakest fields rest under roots instead of forcing them bare under a crop they could not support. From the road, it looked cautious. Under the surface, it was the boldest thing she had ever done. April stayed dry. May turned hot. By June, the county was living under a sky that gave nothing back. Corn leaves curled by noon. Pastures faded. Dust lifted behind trucks and hung over the ditches. Wells weakened. Gardens failed. Every field began to reveal the truth of the soil beneath it. At first, people blamed the weather, because blaming the weather was easier than blaming the years beneath it. The old-timers said dry spells came and went. The younger farmers checked forecasts on their phones every hour, watching bright sun icons stack up like bad news. Sprinklers ran where wells could handle them, then stopped when the pumps began sucking air. Corn that should have been chest-high stalled at a child's waist. Leaves rolled tight as needles. In some fields, the lower stalks turned the color of old paper before tassels had fully opened. Clara watched all of it from the seat of the pickup, one hand on the cracked steering wheel, dust blowing through the open window. She did not feel lucky. She felt warned. Her own farm was not safe simply because she had tried something different. One broken pump, one disease outbreak, one missed sale, one trailer accident, and the whole plan could still collapse. Every evening she walked the water line twice. She checked the wallows. She counted pigs in the heat shimmer. She pressed her fingers into the soil under the squash leaves, searching for moisture the way a person might search for a pulse. On Clara's treated ground, the plants held longer. The sweet corn did not look miraculous, but it stayed dark when nearby corn yellowed. Squash vines ran thick across strawed beds. The soil under the cover crop remained cool enough that Clara could dig down and find moisture when the upper slope across the road had already cracked. In the paddocks the pigs had passed through, roots held the ground in place like stitching. Then the heat broke the county in another way. Confined hog barns began struggling. Fans roared all day. Power bills climbed. Animals went off feed. A producer north of town lost a group during a brutal afternoon when the temperature climbed past 100 and the air inside the barn turned heavy as wet wool. The news reached Clara through a feed delivery driver, and it sat in her stomach all day. She walked out to her own herd and found them half submerged in mud wallows, ears flicking, bodies coated in black cooling clay. They were uncomfortable, but they were alive. They had shade from the old tree line, airflow across the paddocks, and water Clara guarded like it was gold. That night, she added another page to the notebook. Not a victory page, a warning page. Shade mattered. Mud mattered. Moving air mattered. The old ways had not been old because people were sentimental. Some of them had survived because they had once solved problems cheaply, before cheapness was mistaken for ignorance. The first person outside the farm to notice was not the banker, not the neighbors, and not the county agent. It was a chef from Indianapolis, who almost left before he understood what he was seeing. He arrived in July in a clean SUV that looked out of place beside Clara's mud-splashed truck. He had agreed to come after a butcher mentioned her pasture-raised hogs, but the moment he stepped from the vehicle, Clara saw him take in the patched barn, the rough fencing, the muddy lanes, and the smell of livestock in the heat. His shoes were wrong for the yard. His face was wrong for disappointment he was trying to hide. He had expected a charming local farm, the kind with clean signs, washed produce baskets, and animals arranged neatly behind a story. He had found a place still fighting for its life. Clara did not try to charm him. She walked him past the old hog lot, across the rotation strips, and into the first paddock the pigs had worked months earlier. She did not begin with flavor, or labels, or anything that belonged on a menu. She began with the ground. She showed him where the pumpkins had been fed, where the straw had gone down, where rye roots had held the soil through winter. She dug a spade into the field and turned over a dark, moist slice of earth. Then she led him across the fence line to an untreated section, where the same drought had left the soil pale, tight, and cracked. The difference was not a speech. It was there in his hand when he crumbled one soil clod and then the other. Only after that did she show him the pigs. They were no longer auction scraps. They were broad, healthy animals moving under shade, coated with dust and mud, feeding on a ration that tied the county's waste back into its own soil. Clara opened her notebook on the tailgate and let him see the records: feed sources, rotation dates, weight gains, costs, animal losses, soil test numbers, and the rising organic matter in the first paddocks. The chef walked the fence line twice. He watched the pig's nose through fresh squash. He looked back toward the dry corn across the road, then down at the dark soil under his boots. The doubt did not vanish all at once. It changed shape. It became calculation. It became curiosity. It became the look of a man realizing that the roughness of the place was not neglect, but evidence of work too new to look pretty. The chef had come to buy a product. By the time he left, he had bought a story he could prove. He placed an order larger than Clara expected, not out of pity, but because he understood what his customers would understand when they tasted it. Hogs finished on pumpkins, apples, pasture, and grain from a farm that had turned waste into value. He called it pumpkin-finished pork. Clara thought the name sounded too polished for something born out of mud, fear, and spoiled fruit. But the deposit cleared. That deposit kept the lights on. The next order kept the bank from moving first. Then came the letter that would decide everything. The bank gave Clara 30 days to bring the account current or present proof of income strong enough to restructure the note. The paper was plain, the language formal, the meaning simple. If the pigs failed, the farm was gone. Clara spent those 30 days with a kind of quiet intensity that made time feel sharpened. She scheduled processing. She called butchers. She packed order forms. She confirmed restaurant deposits. She weighed hogs, checked trailers, fixed a water leak, and slept in broken pieces. Her father reviewed the numbers at the kitchen table, not as a symbol of helplessness, but as the man who still knew when a plan was honest and when hope was pretending to be math. The hardest morning came 3 days before the first load went to the processor. A trailer tire split on the county road while Clara was hauling empty crates back from town. The sound cracked through the cab like a gunshot, and the truck shuddered toward the ditch before she got it stopped. For 10 minutes, she sat with both hands locked on the wheel, breathing dust and hot rubber, realizing how thin the line was between survival and disaster. One tire, one delay, one missed appointment. The farm could still be lost to something as small and stupid as worn tread. She changed it herself on the shoulder, hands shaking only after the lug nuts finally broke loose. Trucks passed. A few slowed. One stopped long enough for an older farmer to help lift the spare into place without saying much. Months earlier, he had been one of the men who laughed at the pumpkin piles. Now he stood in the heat, holding the jack steady while Clara tightened the wheel. When he left, he did not apologize. He only tapped the side of the trailer twice, as if blessing it without wanting to be caught doing so. When Clara walked into the bank, she carried a folder thick with proof. Sales receipts, deposits, contracts, lower feed costs, soil test reports, a rotation plan for the next year, a payment large enough to stop the farm from sliding into foreclosure. The banker studied the pages in silence. Clara did not ask him to believe in her. Belief had never paid a note. She had brought numbers because numbers were the only language that room respected. The payment was accepted. The farm stayed Whitcomb land. That fall, the full meaning of the gamble finally showed itself. Clara's hogs sold for more than corn would have made on the same tired acres, not because she had raised more animals than anyone else, but because she had lowered her feed cost, created a product people remembered, and begun rebuilding the soil at the same time. The first pumpkin-finished pork sold through the butcher before winter. The Indianapolis restaurant reordered. A small market asked for half hogs. Families who once slowed their trucks to laugh began asking quietly whether there would be pork available before Christmas. The soil kept answering too. The first paddock produced squash so thick the vines hid the rows. The sweet corn from treated ground sold out early at the farmer's market. After the first autumn rain, Clara walked to the lower field and watched water soak in where it used to run brown toward the ditch. She stood there a long time, listening to the soft ticking of rain on leaves, feeling the farm take a breath it had been holding for years. Recognition did not arrive as an apology. It came as questions. A neighbor asked where she bought her electric netting. Another wanted to know which pumpkin farms needed hauling. The county agent returned with sample bags and a younger assistant, kneeling in the field to crumble dark soil between his fingers. The feed store began saving damaged bags and calling Clara before they threw anything out. People who had once spoken of the Whitcomb farm as already lost now stood at the gate and studied the ground, like students too proud to admit they had come to learn. One Saturday in October, nearly a year after the first rotten pumpkins arrived, Clara loaded a small table at the farmer's market with wrapped pork, sweet corn, and squat orange squash from the recovered paddock. She had no banner, only a handwritten sign and a cooler packed with ice. For the first hour, people circled without stepping close, as if the memory of their own laughter made the table harder to approach. Then the butcher's wife bought 2 packages. A young mother bought squash. The feed store owner asked for pork shoulder. By noon, the cooler was half empty, and Clara saw something she had not expected in people's faces. Not amazement, not shame exactly, relief. Her farm surviving meant that failure was not always final, that tired land was not always dead, that maybe the future of the county did not have to look exactly like its past. Clara did not make them say they had been wrong. She had never needed the town to kneel, she had needed the land to stand. That winter, after the last hogs were sold and the bank account held enough to let her sleep through the night, Clara cleaned out the old office beside the machine shed. She swept mouse droppings from the corners, patched the broken window, and carried in a dry shelf. On it, she placed her grandfather's black notebook, her father's marked field maps, and her own thick binder of records. The shelf looked small for so much history. But Clara understood now that a legacy was not a museum. It was not keeping every acre planted the way it had always been planted, just because pride preferred straight rows. A legacy was knowing what to keep, what to change, and what had to be fed back before it could feed anyone again. In the years that followed, the Whitcomb farm did not return to the past. It became something tougher. Hogs rotated behind temporary fence. Pumpkins grew in fields that once could barely hold moisture. Cover crops stitched the slopes through winter. Waste from nearby farms became feed. Manure became fertility. Tired ground darkened one paddock at a time. The barn roof was repaired. The old hog lot was rebuilt. The banknote shrank. And on autumn evenings, when trucks slowed on the county road, Clara could still feel the memory of those first looks through the windshield. Pity, amusement, certainty. Now the drivers looked at healthy pigs under the trees, orange pumpkins stacked near the fence, and fields that no longer seemed exhausted. Some raised a hand. Some stopped with questions. Some drove on without a word. Clara liked the silence best. It sounded nothing like defeat. It sounded like soil after rain, like pigs feeding in straw, like an old farm remembering how to live. She never stood in town and told anyone she had been right. She let the pumpkins rot into value. She let the pigs turn waste into weight. She let the dark soil beneath her boots speak for the family name.